When my son told me that he wouldn't be coming home for Christmas, I didn't say a word. I just stood there in the doorway of the small house I'd built with my own hands, the cold air creeping in around my legs, and listened to him talk as if I were a stranger. He spoke politely, distant but careful, the way you talk to an elder you owe respect to but don't feel it for. I could tell he had rehearsed every word. "Dad, things are just different now," he said. "We're doing Christmas at Isabella's parents' house this year. It's a big deal for them, and they want to keep it small." Small. That word stuck in my throat like a thorn. Small enough to leave me out. Small enough to erase the man who'd taken out 2 mortgages to help him buy that house, who'd sold his truck to cover the down payment when he and Isabella's credit wasn't good enough. I wanted to ask him if her parents knew how much of that marble kitchen countertop came from my blood pressure and overtime shifts. But I didn't. I just nodded and told him to enjoy himself. When the call ended, I stared at my reflection in the dark television screen. My hands were still shaking. Not from anger at first, just disbelief. I thought back to when he was a boy, sitting on my shoulders during fireworks, his small hands gripping my head like I was the whole world. I'd promised him then, in a whisper lost beneath the explosions, that I'd give him everything I had. I guess I kept that promise. The next morning, the coffee tasted different, bitter, sharp. I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by bills and receipts, all bearing his name somewhere. Electricity, car insurance, those temporary transfers I'd made when he lost his job. 5 years of bleeding money to keep his life shining while mine faded. I told myself it was love. That's the lie fathers tell themselves when love starts feeling like servitude. By noon, I made a decision. Not out of rage, but clarity. I called the bank. The woman on the line was cheerful, robotic almost, as if she had no idea she was witnessing a man take back his life. "Yes, Mr. Flores," she said. "We can cancel the automatic mortgage transfer effective immediately." Her tone had no judgment, no sympathy, just efficiency. When she confirmed the cancellation, I thanked her politely. After 5 years, the word "thank you" finally felt earned. That evening, as I sat in my cold living room, I replayed his words. "It's just different now." Different how? Because I don't wear tailored suits like her father? Because my accent doesn't belong at their dinner table? Or because I remind him of everything he's trying to outgrow? Hard work, sacrifice, and a mother who scrubbed floors to pay for his college books? I poured myself a glass of whiskey I'd been saving since Maria died. It burned on the way down, but the burn was clean. I looked at the photo on the mantel. Maria holding Michael on his graduation day, both of them smiling like the world made sense. She would have known what to say, something kind but sharp, something that pierced truth without cruelty. But she wasn't here, and kindness had been wasted long enough. 2 days later, my phone buzzed. "Isabella." I almost didn't answer. When I did, her voice came coated in sugar and superiority. "Dennis," she began, as if talking to a stubborn employee. "There seems to be an issue with the mortgage payment this month." I told her there wasn't an issue, just a change. A pause followed, the kind that tells you someone isn't used to hearing no. She laughed softly. "You can't just stop paying, Dennis. The mortgage is in Michael's name, but the arrangement was voluntary," I interrupted. "And the volunteer resigned." She exhaled hard, the way rich people do when the world doesn't bend fast enough. "Dennis, you don't understand what you're doing. This could ruin Michael's credit." "I understand perfectly," I said. "I'm teaching him what responsibility looks like." There was silence, then venom. "You always resented his success. You never wanted him to have more than you." I smiled even though she couldn't see it. "You're confusing success with debt, Isabella. I wanted him to have better, but not at the cost of losing his soul." She hung up. I sat there for a while, the phone buzzing again and again with her name flashing on the screen. I turned it face down and walked outside. The night air was sharp, the stars distant but clear. I'd forgotten what peace felt like when it wasn't tied to someone else's comfort. By Christmas Eve, I knew they'd realized the mortgage had bounced. I imagined them in that perfect suburban kitchen, Isabella's parents whispering their judgments, Michael pacing, frustrated that money couldn't fix pride. I imagined his face when he realized I wasn't the backup plan anymore. It made me sad and free at the same time. The next morning, my neighbor Rosa knocked with a plate of tamales. "Spend Christmas with us," she said. "The kids would love to see you." For a second, I wanted to say no. Pride still stung. But Maria's voice echoed in my head, "Don't let pain turn you into stone." So I went. Her house was loud and messy. Kids running, laughter bouncing off walls. No marble, no pretense. Just warmth. And when her husband raised a toast, I realized I didn't need to be invited to my son's table to feel like family. That night, as snow began to fall, I sat on my porch with the last of the whiskey and whispered to the cold, "Merry Christmas, Michael." It wasn't bitter. It was farewell. I thought that was the end of it. But revenge has a way of writing its own chapters when people mistake silence for surrender. 3 days later, the newspaper hit my doorstep with a headline that made my blood freeze. Local businessman abandons elderly couple at airport during storm. Beneath it, my name, my photo, and a story so twisted it could only have come from Isabella's family. They'd used their connections to paint me as a cruel old man who'd left them stranded. There was even a quote from Cody Jenkins, her father, calling my behavior disturbing and uncharacteristic of a stable person. I read every word twice. Then I folded the paper neatly, set it aside, and smiled. They thought they'd humiliated me. They'd only lit the fuse. The morning after the article, I shaved, put on a clean shirt, and laid my life out on the kitchen table. Bank statements in one stack, receipts in another, photos torn from social media in a third. Every transfer, every temporary bailout, every shiny purchase they'd paraded online while calling me old-fashioned behind closed doors. I didn't hurry. Revenge done in a rush tastes like ash. Revenge done with patience tastes like truth. I called the bank to request printed records, then walked to the post office for certified copies. The clerk asked if I needed return envelopes. "No," I said. "Delivery is one way." On the way home, I drove past their neighborhood. Wreaths on every door, inflatable reindeer on emerald lawns, and in the center of it all, the house my dollars had kept upright. A delivery van idled in the driveway. New packages. New ornaments for a borrowed life. By mid-afternoon, I had a timeline taped to the wall like a detective building a case. Down payment. Remodel. Appliances. 60 mortgage transfers. Late-night Venmos labeled emergency. I highlighted the holidays where I'd eaten soup alone while my money bought prime rib elsewhere. The wall looked honest, finally. It showed what I had refused to say aloud. Love without boundaries turns into funding. At 4, my phone lit up with a new number. The voice introduced herself as Patricia, lifestyle editor at the Spokane paper. She used the careful cadence people take when they want to sound neutral while holding a knife. "I'd like to offer you a chance to tell your side," she said. "Off the record at first." "My side isn't gossip," I replied. "It's arithmetic." I invited her to meet me at a coffee shop by the river at 6. Snow drifted in thin veils as I carried the folder inside and placed it on the table between us. She skimmed, frowned, then read again, slower this time. When she looked up, her neutrality had a crack in it. "This article came through a recommendation," she admitted. "We should have verified the weather report alone." "Storms are easy to fake on paper," I said. "So are families." She asked if I wanted a retraction. I shook my head. I want the truth printed when it matters most. I slid a second folder across to her. "Embargo until Christmas night. If anyone pressures you, print the pressure too." On the way home, I stopped at a hardware store and bought brown twine, 12 manila envelopes, and a fresh blue pen. At my kitchen table, I assembled 12 packets of evidence, each one a mirror, the ledger of a father's generosity beside the grin of a family spending it. I addressed them to the names I had copied from Isabella's invitation post. Neighbors, an uncle, 2 couples who ran in Cody's circle, the pastor who had blessed their housewarming. I added one more packet for Michael. Not to punish him. To show him the rope he'd helped knot around our necks. The next day was Christmas Eve. The city glittered anyway, indifferent to private wars. I ironed my only suit, the navy one I reserved for goodbyes and courtrooms, and drove to their block at dusk. Cars lined the street. Warm windows flickered with gold. Laughter spilled through the door each time someone arrived carrying a dessert balanced like a trophy. I waited until all the headlights had settled, then walked up the path with my briefcase and an expression no one would challenge. The door was unlatched. Isabella trusted appearances like guard dogs. I stepped into the foyer, coat side on polished hooks. From the dining room came the clink of glass and the curated music of belonging. I saw Michael at the head of the table, a role he'd paid for with silence. I saw Isabella directing the room with a smile that could slice paper. I stood there long enough to remember the first toy he had ever broken and how he waited for me to fix it. Then I cleared my throat. Conversations snagged and tore. Faces turned. Isabella's smile calcified. "Dennis," she said, voice pitched so guests would hear sorrow instead of irritation. "This isn't a good time." "It's exactly the time," I answered, and laid the packets one by one at each place setting. I brought gifts. No one moved at first. But curiosity has its own hunger. Pages flipped. Chairs creaked. A woman in pearls pushed her glasses higher and began to read. A man with a club tan frowned at a highlighted line and breathed out through his nose. The pastor's eyebrows climbed in quiet alarm. "This is private," Isabella snapped. "So was the wire I set up to pay your mortgage," I said. "So was the paper you used to call me unstable." Cody rose halfway as if to loom, then saw that there was nothing to loom over. "This is harassment," he said. "This is accounting," I replied. Michael hadn't opened his packet. He stared at mine instead, like he could will it shut. "Dad," he said finally, "please don't do this here." "I did everything there," I said softly, gesturing to the walls, the chandelier, the oven that still smelled faintly of new metal. "I'm just catching up." The room split along invisible lines. Some guests glanced at Isabella with the tentative loyalty of investors. Others pivoted toward me, heads tilted, waiting to see if truth had a voice. Catherine tried charm. "Dennis, we're sorry for any misunderstandings." "Surely we can." "Misunderstandings don't autodraft on the 15th, I said. "They don't bounce when you buy a new mixer." Patricia walked in then. Not a theatrical entrance. She'd been invited for the performative charity of a feature on holiday hosting. Fate prefers efficient routes. She caught my eye, and I nodded once. She took a seat on a side chair, set a small recorder on her knee, and did nothing at all. Which is another way of saying she did her job. "Everyone," I said, "you're free to keep dining. I only came to return what I mistakenly treated as gifts instead of bills. If you enjoy the food, thank the man who paid for the stove. If you enjoy the roof, thank the man who borrowed against his own. If you enjoy the heat, thank the man who chose soup in December so this room could feel like July." Silence is rarely empty. Tonight it bulged with shifting loyalties, with rumors rethreading themselves midair. The pastor cleared his throat. "Is this accurate?" he asked Michael. My son opened his envelope. He read the first page, then the second. His mouth trembled in a way I remembered from scraped knees and difficult confessions. "It's accurate," he said, without drama, and the room expelled a soft, startled breath. Isabella's chair scraped. "Michael," she warned. He didn't look at her. "Dad, why didn't you tell me you were hurting?" "Because you didn't seem to hear anything that wasn't a payment," I said. "Consider this a sentence with a period." I gathered my empty briefcase. "Merry Christmas." I walked out through the foyer where coats still whispered of perfume and winter. I felt eyes on my back and let them weigh what they wanted. Outside, snow began to fall, lazy and honest. I sat in my truck and didn't start it. Behind me, the house went louder, then quiet, then something new, the clatter of a story falling apart. I didn't feel triumphant. Triumph is noisy. What I felt was space, like a room after you've moved the furniture and found the floor again. I stayed until the windshield filmed with white, then drove home along streets that remembered me before any of this. On my table, the twine and pen sat where I'd left them, humble tools that had turned money back into meaning. I poured tea instead of whiskey and waited for whatever would come next. Morning arrived like a curtain lifting after the final act. The sun came through the blinds in thin bars, catching the dust that drifted lazily through the quiet. I made coffee without checking my phone. Silence had become its own language now, clearer than any apology ever could be. 3 days passed before I heard from Michael. A soft knock, hesitant. I opened the door to find him standing there, not in his tailored jacket, but in an old sweatshirt I hadn't seen since he was 20. His face looked different. Not older, but stripped down, like someone who'd finally stopped pretending. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He looked around my small living room, noticing the new paint, the repaired lamp, the simple, sturdy furniture I'd bought with my first free paycheck. His gaze lingered on Maria's photograph above the mantel. "Mom would have been proud," he murmured. I poured him coffee and waited. He turned the cup in his hands before speaking. "They're gone," he said. "Isabella took the kids to her parents' place. Says she needs time to think." "That's one thing money can't buy," I said quietly. He nodded, then looked at me. "I read everything you gave them. Every transfer. Every bill. I didn't realize how much I'd taken for granted." "You realized," I said. "You just didn't want to see it." He didn't argue. For a long moment, we sat in the same silence that had once separated us. Then he said, "They ran the retraction. The newspaper. Full front page in the Christmas edition." I raised an eyebrow. "Patricia," he said. "She published everything. The documents, the truth, even the photo of you at the dinner table handing out the envelopes. She called it the cost of silence. It's gone viral. People are talking." I leaned back in my chair. I hadn't wanted fame. I'd only wanted peace. But sometimes the universe uses noise to give quiet men their due. Michael exhaled, long and low. "Dad, I've lost the house." I didn't answer right away. He continued, "The bank started foreclosure. I tried to get a loan, but no one trusts us after the article. Cody's business friends pulled out. Isabella's parents are furious. Actions have consequences," I said simply. He looked up sharply, but there was no anger, just grief. "I deserve that." I nodded. "Yes, you do. But what you do next decides whether you stay broken or start building." He ran a hand over his face. "I don't know where to begin." I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the neighbors' kids were building a snowman, laughing as one's gloves stuck to the wet snow. "Start small," I said. "Get a job you respect, even if it pays half what you made before. Earn before you spend. And remember, no one owes you comfort." He was quiet for a while, then whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad. For everything. For how I treated you, for how I let them talk about Mom." I turned back to him. His eyes were wet. "Apologies don't fix the past," I said, "but they start to fix the future." We spent the afternoon repairing the squeaky door in the hallway. He offered to pay for the new hinge, and I let him, not because I needed the money, but because he needed the act. Sometimes redemption starts with small noises. When he left, he hugged me. It was awkward at first, then real, the kind that says more than words. After he drove off, I sat by the window watching the tracks his car left in the snow. They curved at the corner and disappeared, but the sound of his tires lingered, soft and steady. A week later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address, just my name written in careful script. Inside was a check, folded around a note, for what I owe and for what I can never repay. Michael. It wasn't for the full amount, but it was honest. I didn't cash it. I framed it and hung it beside Maria's picture. Proof that remorse, at its purest, is its own currency. Months passed. Spring crept in quietly, trading snow for rain and guilt for renewal. The story faded from headlines, but not from memory. I started volunteering at a local shelter on weekends, teaching carpentry to men who'd lost their footing, some to addiction, some to pride, some to people who took more than they gave. In their faces, I saw fragments of myself, the giver, the fool, the man learning how to stop bleeding love into ungrateful hands. One afternoon, Rosa stopped by with her grandkids. "You look lighter," she said. "I am," I told her. "Turns out revenge isn't about hurting someone. It's about stopping them from hurting you." She smiled. "That's not revenge, Dennis. That's healing." Maybe she was right. Maybe both words mean the same thing when the wound finally closes. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and no whiskey. The porch light hummed, newly fixed, casting a soft glow over the yard. Across the street, I saw Michael pulling up in a small pickup. A different car, modest and old, but running. He stepped out with 2 paper bags of groceries. "Dinner," he called out. I laughed, the sound startling in the quiet. He set the bags down on the table, pulling out tortillas, onions, fresh cilantro. "I thought maybe you'd teach me how to make Mom's tamales," he said. I handed him the apron. "Only if you promise not to burn the kitchen." He grinned, and for a second, I saw the boy again, the one who used to fall asleep on my shoulder after long days at the park. We cooked in companionable silence, the kind that fills the air instead of empties it. When the smell of steaming masa filled the house, he said, "I miss her." "Me too," I said. "But I think she'd like how this turned out." He nodded. She would have said, "About time you learned to make your own Christmas dinner." We laughed until the timer beeped. The tamales came out imperfect but warm, their edges crumbling slightly. We ate them standing at the counter, steam curling into the light. No gold-plated silverware, no curated playlist. Just us, 2 men who'd finally learned what family costs and what it's worth. Later, after he left, I walked out onto the porch again. The street was quiet, the air cool with the scent of wet earth. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "I did it, Maria. I finally stopped saving people who didn't want to be saved." The stars didn't answer, but I didn't need them to. Peace, for once, didn't need an audience. Inside, the newspaper clippings, bank statements, and receipts were gone, shredded, burned, turned to ash weeks ago. All that remained was the photo of a woman smiling, a framed check, and the smell of tamales lingering in the air. I turned off the porch light, locked the door, and smiled. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. It felt earned.